Hi, I'm Dorothy. I thought being a mother-in-law meant being part of a growing family, sharing holidays, and watching my son build the life he'd always dreamed of. Instead, on December 23rd, my daughter-in-law, Bethany, handed me a packed overnight bag and told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas anymore. She said I was too controlling, too intrusive, and that my presence was ruining their family time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What she didn't know was that I'd been quietly paying their $2,800 monthly mortgage for the past 3 years. Before we dive into this mess, tell me in the comments, what's the most shocking family betrayal you've ever experienced during the holidays? I read every single response, and trust me, after what I've been through, I thought I'd seen it all. Because sometimes the people who slam the door in your face have no idea they just locked themselves out of their own security. The drive up to Willowbrook had been pure magic that December evening. Fresh snow dusted the suburban streets like powdered sugar, and every house glowed with warm Christmas lights. I'd spent the morning wrapping presents for my granddaughter Lily, an art set she'd been begging for, along with 3 new books and a stuffed elephant that reminded me of the one my son, Daniel, had loved at her age. I'd even brought my grandmother's vintage ornaments, the delicate glass angels that Lily had admired last Christmas, thinking this might be the year to pass them down. I pulled into the driveway of 847 Maple Ridge Drive, the house I'd helped them buy when Daniel's credit score wasn't quite enough to qualify a loan. The 2-story colonial with its red brick facade and white shutters looked like something from a holiday card, especially with the fresh wreath Bethany had hung on the front door. As I gathered the first load of gifts from the trunk, I noticed the living room curtains twitch. Someone was watching. The front door opened before I could even knock. Bethany stood there, arms crossed, still wearing her work scrubs from the dental office. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face held that pinched expression I'd learned to recognize over the past year. The one that meant trouble. "Dorothy," she said, not moving aside to let me in, "we need to talk." I set down the gift bags, confusion prickling at the back of my neck. "Of course, sweetheart. Let me just bring everything inside first. Where's Lily? I brought her that art set she wanted." "That's what I need to talk to you about." Bethany's voice was flat, rehearsed. "We can't stay for Christmas this year." The words hung in the frigid air like icicles waiting to fall. I'm sorry? What? Daniel and I have been discussing this, and we've decided we need space as a nuclear family. Your constant involvement in our lives, your opinions about everything we do, your need to control every situation, it's too much. I blinked at her, the gift bag suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. "Bethany, I don't understand. What did I do? Last week when we talked about Christmas dinner, everything seemed fine." "That's exactly the problem. You automatically assumed you'd be cooking Christmas dinner. You ordered the ham without asking. You rearranged our kitchen cabinets when you were here last month because you said our system was inefficient. You bought Lily clothes without consulting us about her size or our preferences." Each accusation felt like a slap. The ham I'd ordered was the same honey-glazed one that Daniel had requested every year since he was 12 years old. I'd reorganized their kitchen cabinets because Bethany had complained about not being able to find anything. The clothes for Lily was because she'd outgrown everything and I'd noticed her jeans were getting too short. "Where's Daniel?" I asked, looking past her into the house. "I'd like to talk to my son." "He's at his office Christmas party, and he agrees with me completely. We're both tired of you treating us like children who can't manage our own lives." That's when I saw the overnight bag sitting by the door. Small, navy blue, the one I'd loaned her when she and Daniel went to Chicago last spring. It was packed and waiting. "You packed a bag for me?" The reality started sinking in, cold and sharp. We thought it would be easier if you stayed at the Holiday Inn tonight and drove back to Riverside tomorrow. Daniel will call you next week when things have cooled down. The Holiday Inn. On December 23rd. Like I was some unwelcome stranger instead of the woman who'd held Daniel's hand through every fever, celebrated every achievement, and watched him marry the woman now standing before me with such cold determination. Bethany, it's Christmas Eve tomorrow. Lily is expecting me. I have presents. I have food planned. Lily will understand. Kids are resilient. And honestly, Dorothy, she needs to learn that Christmas is about immediate family, not about grandparents who can't respect boundaries.
The word boundaries hit like a physical blow. I'd heard it before in our conversations, usually when I'd offered help they hadn't directly asked for or shared an opinion they didn't want to hear. But this wasn't about boundaries. This was about erasure. I stood there on their front porch, snow beginning to fall again, watching my daughter-in-law close the door on 3 years of quiet sacrifice, countless acts of love, and financial support she knew nothing about. The mortgage payments I'd been making since Daniel's hours got cut at the engineering firm. The property taxes I'd covered when Bethany's dental office salary wasn't enough. The homeowner's insurance I'd quietly taken over when their budget got tight after Lily started private school. "I want to talk to Daniel," I said one more time. "He's not available. And Dorothy," she paused, her hand on the doorknob, "don't try to manipulate this situation or make us feel guilty. We're doing what's best for our family." The door closed with a soft click, leaving me standing in the snow with a bag I hadn't packed and nowhere to go on the night before Christmas Eve. As I drove away from Maple Ridge Drive, my hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel, I thought about the automatic bank transfer scheduled to process in 6 days, the one that had been quietly keeping their dream home afloat while they built their perfect little nuclear family. The one Bethany had just decided didn't deserve a place at their Christmas table. Some people say the holidays bring out the best in families. Sometimes they just reveal who people really are when they think they don't need you anymore. I checked into the Holiday Inn with its generic lobby decorations and the faint smell of chlorine from the indoor pool. As I sat on the edge of the stiff hotel bed, staring at the overnight bag Bethany had so thoughtfully packed for me, the irony wasn't lost on me. She'd included my reading glasses, my medications, even my favorite lavender hand cream. But she'd forgotten to pack my dignity. Outside the window, Christmas lights twinkled mockingly from the shopping center across the street. Families hurried through the parking lot with last-minute gifts, their laughter carrying on the cold December air. Here I was, 62 years old, spending Christmas Eve alone in a hotel room because I'd apparently committed the unforgivable sin of caring too much. I unzipped the bag slowly, as if it might contain answers instead of hastily folded clothes. 3 sweaters, 2 pairs of pants, underwear, socks. She'd even remembered my phone charger. Such thoughtful cruelty. Each item felt like evidence of how thoroughly she'd planned this ambush, how completely she'd written me out of their Christmas story. My phone buzzed against the nightstand. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe Daniel was calling. Maybe he'd stood up to his wife. Maybe this was all some terrible misunderstanding that could be fixed with a conversation. Instead, it was a text from my sister Carla in Phoenix. "Can't wait to see the photos of Lily opening her presents tomorrow. Hope you're having a wonderful Christmas Eve with the family." I stared at the message until the words blurred. How do you explain to someone that you've been exiled from Christmas, that the family you've quietly supported for years just decided you were expendable? I walked to the small desk by the window and sat down in the uncomfortable plastic chair. The view overlooked the hotel parking lot where a maintenance worker was salting the walkways. Methodical, purposeful, getting things done while other people slept. That's when it hit me, the clarity I'd been missing in my shock and hurt. This wasn't just about Christmas dinner or rearranged kitchen cabinets or buying Lily clothes without permission. This was about power, about who got to make decisions in Daniel and Bethany's household. And somehow, without ever meaning to, I'd become a threat to Bethany's authority. But here's what she didn't understand about threats. They only work when the other person has something to lose. I opened the small hotel notepad and started writing. Not angry letters I'd never send, but numbers, figures. A careful accounting of exactly what Dorothy Hartwell had been contributing to the Wilkins family finances. Monthly mortgage payment, $2,874. I'd been covering that since October 2021 when Daniel's company downsized and cut his salary by 30%. Property taxes, $4,200 annually, paid every January. Homeowners insurance, $1,800 per year. The private school tuition for Lily, $850 a month because Bethany insisted the public schools weren't good enough. Then there were the extras. The new roof last spring when theirs started leaking, $8,500. The HVAC system that died during the heat wave, $6,200. Christmas gifts, birthday presents, the family vacation to Disney World that I'd quietly funded because Lily deserves magical memories. I stared at the numbers on the hotel notepad. 3 years of silent generosity. 3 years of making sure my son's family never had to worry about losing their home or compromising their lifestyle. 96 mortgage payments I'd made without ever asking for recognition or gratitude. And now I was sitting in a Holiday Inn because I'd violated some invisible boundary by caring enough to show up. My phone rang, startling me from my calculations. This time it was Daniel. "Mom?" His voice sounded strained, careful. "I heard you and Bethany had a conversation tonight. Is that what we're calling it?" I kept my voice steady, neutral. "A conversation?" "Look, I think maybe you both got a little heated. You know how Bethany gets when she's stressed about the holidays. And well, you can be a bit overwhelming sometimes." Overwhelming. The words sat between us like a boulder. "Daniel, I brought Christmas presents and ingredients for our traditional breakfast. How is that overwhelming?" He sighed, and I could picture him rubbing his forehead the way he'd done since he was a teenager facing a difficult conversation. "It's not about the presents, Mom. It's about the pattern. The way you just assume you'll be part of everything without asking. The way you make decisions for us. What decisions have I made for you?" Silence stretched across the phone line. Finally, "The ham. You ordered a 20-pound ham without checking with us first. You asked me to handle Christmas dinner. You specifically said you wanted the same ham we always get. But you didn't ask this year. You just did it." I closed my eyes, feeling something crack inside my chest. "Daniel, do you want me to come for Christmas or not?" Another long pause. "I think it might be better if we have some space this year. Let things cool down. Bethany's really upset, and I need to support my wife." Support his wife, the woman who'd packed my bag and locked me out of my granddaughter's Christmas morning, the woman who had no idea that supporting her meant I'd been paying for the roof over her head. "I understand," I said quietly. "You need to support your wife." "Daniel, don't be like that. This isn't permanent. It's just we need to figure out some boundaries, some healthier ways to be family." Boundaries. Healthier. The language of self-help books and marriage counselors use like weapons to justify the unjustifiable. "You're right," I said. "We definitely need healthier boundaries." Something in my tone must have surprised him because his voice shifted, became more conciliatory. "Maybe we can do New Year's instead, or plan something for later in January." "Maybe we can." I stared at my reflection in the dark hotel window, seeing a woman I barely recognized, someone who had been so busy giving that she'd forgotten to ask what she was worth. "Daniel, I love you. You know that, right?"
Of course, Mom. I love you too. This is just complicated. It doesn't have to be. After I hung up, I sat in the hotel silence for a long time. Outside, the last of the Christmas shoppers had disappeared, leaving only empty parking spaces and the steady rhythm of snow beginning to fall again. I picked up the pen and continued my calculations. Not just the mortgage and taxes and insurance, but everything. Every dinner I'd paid for when we went out as a family. Every time I'd covered groceries when their budget was tight. Every small emergency I quietly handled so Daniel and Bethany could maintain their illusion of financial independence. The final number made me blink twice. In 3 years, I'd contributed over $180,000 to their household. Not loans they'd asked for, not gifts they'd acknowledged, just quiet, invisible support from a mother who wanted her son's family to thrive. And now I was sitting in a Holiday Inn because I'd violated some invisible boundary by caring enough to show up. I folded the notepad and tucked it into my purse. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve, and I had some thinking to do. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't worried about their mortgage payment or their heating bill or whether they had enough in their checking account to cover Lily's school fees. Tonight, I was thinking about boundaries. The healthy kind. The kind that might teach my son and daughter-in-law the difference between a mother's love and a mother's financial support. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people discover what they've taken for granted. Christmas Eve morning arrived gray and bitter, matching my mood as I sat in the hotel's continental breakfast area nursing weak coffee and stale pastries. Around me, families chatted excitedly about their holiday plans, while I pretended to read the local newspaper, my mind churning through 3 years of memories I apparently had been too naive to interpret correctly.
Mom, I need to ask you something, and it's embarrassing. He'd been working at Henderson Engineering for 2 years, finally feeling secure in his career after bouncing between contract jobs. The company's restructuring. They're keeping me on, but they're cutting everyone's salary by 30%. I don't know how we're going to make the mortgage payment next month. I could hear Bethany in the background, her voice sharp and worried. Tell her about the late notice from the bank. My heart had clenched. They'd bought their dream house just 18 months earlier, stretching their budget to afford the neighborhood they wanted for Lily. The pride in Daniel's voice when he'd shown me around that colonial on Maple Ridge Drive, pointing out the hardwood floors, the updated kitchen, the big backyard where Lily could play, had been worth every penny of the down payment assistance I'd quietly provided. How much is the payment? I'd asked, already reaching for my checkbook. Mom, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. How much? That first payment of $2,847 was supposed to be temporary, just until Daniel's company stabilized or he found something better. But Henderson Engineering never restored the salaries, and better opportunities were scarcer than any of us had anticipated. So the temporary became routine, became invisible, became just another way Dorothy took care of her family. I'd started setting up the automatic transfer after the 3rd month, when it became clear this wasn't a short-term solution. Every 15th of the month, $2,847 moved silently from my retirement account to Daniel's checking account. He'd text me a simple, "Thank you, Mom," each time, and we'd never discussed it beyond that basic acknowledgement. The gratitude felt genuine then. Daniel would invite me for Sunday dinners where he'd always make sure I got the biggest slice of dessert in the most comfortable chair. Bethany would smile and tell neighbors at block parties how lucky they were to have such a supportive mother-in-law. Those small gestures had felt like enough recognition for my sacrifice. But looking back now, I could see how quickly the gratitude had morphed into expectation and then into entitlement. It was January 2022 when the property tax bill arrived, $4,200 due immediately to avoid penalties. Daniel had called again, this time with less embarrassment and more assumption. "Mom, I know you're already helping with the mortgage, but the property taxes are due. With Christmas expenses and Lily's school fees, we just don't have it right now." No preamble about how difficult it was to ask, no lengthy explanation about their financial situation, just a straightforward request that assumed my agreement. I'd paid it, of course, but something had shifted in the dynamic.
The grateful son had been replaced by someone who saw my bank account as a backup plan. The HVAC system crisis had been the real turning point. July 2022, during the worst heat wave in a decade, their air conditioning unit died completely. The repair estimate was $6,200 for a full replacement, and with a 3-year-old in the house, waiting wasn't an option. "We need to get this fixed immediately," Bethany had declared when I arrived to check on them. She had spoken directly to me for once, bypassing Daniel entirely. "The heat is dangerous for Lily, and I can't miss work. The dental office is swamped with summer emergencies." No request, no acknowledgement that this was a huge financial burden for anyone to absorb, just a statement of fact. They needed it fixed, therefore, I would pay for it. When I'd hesitated, not refusing, just taking a moment to process the amount, Bethany had actually rolled her eyes. "Dorothy, we can't live without air conditioning. Surely you understand that your granddaughter's comfort and safety are more important than whatever financial concerns you might have." My granddaughter's comfort and safety. The words had been weaponized so smoothly I'd barely registered the manipulation. Of course I'd paid for the HVAC replacement. What grandmother wouldn't prioritize her granddaughter's well-being? But that night, writing the check, I'd felt something I'd never experienced before in relation to Daniel's family. Resentment. Not toward Lily, never toward her, but toward the casual way they'd enlisted me as their personal bank, without ever acknowledging the weight of that role. The pattern had accelerated from there. Lily's private school tuition when the public school kindergarten wasn't challenging enough, the new roof when theirs started leaking during spring storms, Daniel's car repairs when his Honda started having transmission problems, Bethany's dental conference in Miami because professional development is an investment in our family's future. Each request had come with less gratitude and more expectation. By 2023, they weren't even asking anymore. They were informing me. "Mom, we're going to need help with Lily's summer camp fees," Daniel would say during our weekly phone calls. Not, "Could you help us with?" or "Would it be possible for you to?" Just matter-of-fact statements about what they were going to need from me. The breaking point should have been the Disney World vacation last spring. Bethany had announced at Easter dinner that they were planning a family trip for Lily's birthday, then casually mentioned that they'd put it on their credit card since Dorothy always covers the big family expenses. I'd been discussed and committed to a $4,500 vacation without even being consulted. When I gently suggested that maybe they should discuss large expenses with me before making commitments, Bethany had looked genuinely confused.
But Dorothy, you always say yes, and this is for Lily. You wouldn't want her to miss out on a magical childhood experience because of money, would you? There it was again. My love for my granddaughter being used as leverage to extract money from me. And the assumption that I would always say yes because I always had said yes. My generosity had been reframed as obligation, my love as financial responsibility. But it wasn't just the money. It was the way my contributions had become invisible, expected, unworthy of acknowledgement. Daniel no longer thanked me for the mortgage payments. Bethany no longer smiled when I covered unexpected expenses. They'd both begun treating my financial support like a natural law. Gravity, taxes, and Dorothy's checkbook. The most painful part was realizing how they'd rewritten our family narrative to accommodate their comfort with taking my money. In their version of events, I was the overbearing mother-in-law who couldn't mind her own business. Never mind that my business included keeping their house out of foreclosure and their child in private school. They'd transformed my generosity into controlling behavior, my care into intrusion, my presence into an imposition. And somehow I'd let them. Sitting in that hotel breakfast area, watching other families laugh together over their Christmas Eve plans, I finally understood what had really happened the night before. Bethany hadn't kicked me out because I was overwhelming. She'd kicked me out because she'd figured out how to get my money without dealing with my presence. Direct deposit for the mortgage, automatic transfers for property taxes and insurance, written checks for emergencies and extras. She'd streamlined our relationship down to its most essential element, my financial contribution to their lifestyle. My actual presence had become unnecessary, even inconvenient. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, scrolling through 3 years of transfers and payments. The evidence of my love reduced to transaction histories and account balances. Nearly $200,000 in total, including all the extras and emergencies I hadn't even calculated the night before. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something besides hurt and confusion. I felt clarity, crystal clear, ice-cold clarity about exactly what my relationship with Daniel and Bethany had become. I wasn't their family member. I was their financial sponsor. And sponsors, I realized, could choose to withdraw their support. The breakfast area was emptying out as families headed home to prepare for Christmas Eve festivities. I remained at my corner table, making lists and calculations, planning my next moves with the same methodical care I'd used to balance my checkbook for 40 years. Because if Bethany wanted boundaries, she was about to discover what real boundaries looked like. And if Daniel wanted to support his wife's decision to exclude me from their family, he was about to learn what exclusion actually meant. Some lessons, I reflected, are too expensive to learn gently. By Christmas Eve afternoon, I'd moved from the hotel breakfast area to a quiet corner booth at Perkins Family Restaurant, my laptop open and surrounded by printed bank statements, legal documents, and a yellow legal pad covered in my careful handwriting. The restaurant was nearly empty. Most families were home preparing for their celebrations, which gave me the privacy I needed for what was essentially financial surgery. The first step was understanding exactly what I was dealing with. I'd spent the morning on the phone with my bank, requesting detailed transaction histories for the past 3 years. The customer service representative, probably working a holiday shift she didn't want, had been surprisingly helpful when I explained I needed comprehensive records for family financial planning purposes. The numbers, laid out in stark black and white, were staggering, even more so than my rough calculations had suggested. The mortgage payments alone totaled $102,492 in 36 months. Property taxes, $12,600 across 3 years. Homeowners insurance, $5,400. The private school tuition I'd been covering since Lily started kindergarten, $25,500. But those were just the predictable expenses. The emergencies told a different story entirely. The HVAC replacement, $6,200. The roof repair, $8,500. Daniel's car transmission, $3,400. Bethany's dental conference in Miami, $2,800. The Disney World vacation, $4,500. New appliances when their washer and dryer died, $2,100. Each expense had been presented as urgent, unavoidable, essential for the family's well-being. And each time I'd responded immediately, without question, because that's what mothers do. Except I wasn't just being a mother. I was being a bank that never charged interest, never required collateral, and apparently never earned any genuine appreciation. The final tally was $203,847. Over 3 years, I had contributed more than $200,000 to Daniel and Bethany's lifestyle, more than they'd paid for their house's down payment, more than Daniel made in salary for an entire year. I stared at that number until it burned itself into my memory. Then I opened my laptop and began the methodical process of taking it all back. The first call was to my bank's customer service line, where I requested to speak with a personal banking specialist about modifying automatic transfers. Janet, a woman with a warm voice who probably had her own family Christmas preparations waiting at home, walked me through the process with professional efficiency. I need to cancel all automatic transfers to account ending in 7842, I read from my records, effective immediately.
That's your son Daniel's account, correct? Janet had clearly pulled up our linked account information. The monthly transfer of $2,847? That's correct. I also need to cancel the property tax escrow transfer scheduled for January 3rd and the insurance payment scheduled for January 15th. There was a pause as Janet processed the requests. Mrs. Hartwell, these cancellations will take effect within 24 hours. Are you sure you want to proceed with all of them simultaneously? I'm absolutely certain. Would you like me to set up any notifications to the receiving account about these changes? I considered this for a moment. Daniel and Bethany would discover the changes soon enough when their January bills came due. No notifications necessary. After hanging up with Janet, I turned to my homeowner's insurance policy, the one covering their house that I'd been quietly paying for 2 years. A 20-minute phone call to the insurance company's customer service line resulted in the policy being transferred back to Daniel's name with the notation that future payments would be his responsibility. The policyholder will receive notification of this change within 5 business days, the representative informed me. The next premium payment of $150 will be due January 30th. I made a note on my legal pad. Daniel would get the insurance notice right around the time he discovered his mortgage payment had been rejected for insufficient funds. The property tax situation required a different approach. I'd been listed as a secondary payer on their county tax records, which had allowed me to pay their annual assessment without any complications. A call to the county treasurer's office, thankfully open until 3 p.m. on Christmas Eve for holiday emergencies, resulted in my name being removed from their account entirely. "Ma'am, just to confirm," the clerk said, "you're requesting removal as an authorized payer for the property at 847 Maple Ridge Drive?" "That's correct. I'm no longer associated with that property." The primary property owners will need to handle all future payments directly. They'll receive a notification letter within 10 business days. Next came the private school situation. Lily's tuition at Oakwood Academy was paid quarterly, and the next payment of $2,550 was due January 10th. I'd been listed as the financial guarantor on Lily's enrollment paperwork, which meant the school contacted me directly when payments were due. The school's administrative office was closed for Christmas break, but their automated system allowed me to remove my payment authorization and contact information. Effective January 2nd, all tuition communications would go directly to Daniel and Bethany. By 4 p.m., I had systematically removed myself from every financial obligation related to their household. 3 years of support, eliminated in a series of phone calls that took less than 2 hours to complete. But I wasn't finished. Opening a new document on my laptop, I began drafting what I mentally called my financial impact letter. Not angry, not emotional, just a clear, factual summary of exactly what Dorothy Hartwell's overwhelming presence had been contributing to their lives. The letter began with a simple statement. "Daniel and Bethany, since you've decided that boundaries are necessary for our family relationship, I'm implementing some financial boundaries that I believe will be helpful for all of us." I listed every canceled payment, every terminated service, every removed financial support with the clinical precision of an accountant. The monthly mortgage assistance, canceled. The property tax coverage, terminated. The insurance payments, transferred back to them. The school tuition guarantee, removed. "These changes will allow you to experience the independence you've been seeking," I wrote. "Managing your household finances without my involvement will help establish the healthy boundaries Bethany mentioned." I included a detailed spreadsheet showing exactly what these boundaries would mean in practical terms. January's financial obligations, $6,247 in bills that had previously been my responsibility. February, $3,397. March, $5,847 when the next quarterly tuition payment came due. The letter concluded with a paragraph that took me 30 minutes to craft perfectly. "I understand that my presence in your lives has become burdensome, and I respect your decision to prioritize your nuclear family's autonomy. I'm confident that you'll both appreciate the opportunity to manage your household independently, without the complications that my support apparently created. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you need any clarification about which services have been discontinued." I printed 3 copies of the letter and the accompanying financial documentation. 1 copy would be mailed to their house, timed to arrive December 27th, when they'd be dealing with post-Christmas credit card bills and preparing for New Year's expenses. 1 copy would be hand-delivered to Daniel's office on December 30th. The 3rd copy would remain in my files along with all the bank statements and cancellation confirmations. As I sealed the first envelope, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in my thinking. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't worried about Daniel and Bethany's financial well-being.
I wasn't calculating whether they'd have enough money for groceries or whether their credit cards could handle unexpected expenses. Instead, I was curious to see how they'd react when their safety net disappeared. Curious to discover whether their marriage could handle the stress of actual financial responsibility. Curious about whether their commitment to independence would survive contact with reality. The waitress approached my table as I packed up my documents. "More coffee, hun?" "No, thank you," I said, closing my laptop with a decisive click. "I think I'm finished here."
Outside, Christmas Eve was settling into early darkness, and the parking lot was nearly empty. I sat in my car for a moment, watching the restaurant's windows glow warmly against the winter evening. Somewhere across town, Daniel and Bethany were probably preparing for their first Christmas without overwhelming Dorothy. Maybe they were wrapping presents for Lily. Maybe they were cooking dinner together. Maybe they were congratulating themselves on finally establishing those healthy boundaries. In 3 weeks, they'd receive their first mortgage bill without my automatic payment backing them up. In 4 weeks, they'd get a notice from Lily's school about the overdue tuition payment. In 5 weeks, their property tax bill would arrive with no secondary payer to catch it if they couldn't cover it themselves. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, heading back to my hotel room where I'd spend Christmas Eve watching old movies and ordering room service. It wasn't the Christmas I'd planned, but it was the Christmas I'd chosen. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people experience the full consequences of their choices, even when those consequences arrive with interest. The first sign of trouble came exactly 36 hours after Christmas. I was back in my own apartment in Riverside, settling into the strange normalcy of being home alone for the holidays, when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Not calls yet, those would come later, but text messages that began arriving like the first drops of rain before a storm. The messages started with casual confusion from extended family members who'd been expecting updates about Christmas morning with Lily. My cousin Rebecca in Denver, "How was Lily's Christmas? Did she love the art set?" My neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who'd watched Lily grow up through my proud grandmother stories, "Hope you had a wonderful Christmas with the family." Each message felt like a small paper cut, reminding me of the Christmas I'd been excluded from. But I responded to each one honestly, briefly. "Spent a quiet Christmas this year. Hope yours was lovely." By Tuesday, December 26th, the messages had shifted in tone. My sister Carla called from Phoenix, her voice tight with concern. "Dorothy, Daniel just posted some very strange things on Facebook. Something about financial responsibility and learning hard lessons. What's going on?" I hadn't looked at social media since Christmas Eve. Opening Facebook felt like picking at a scab, but curiosity won over self-preservation. Daniel's posts painted a picture of confused victimhood that would have been almost funny if it hadn't been so infuriating. Sometimes family relationships require difficult boundaries, learning to navigate independence when others have different expectations about involvement. Posted December 25th at 11:47 p.m. Then, December 26th, grateful for friends who understand that growth sometimes means making tough choices about family dynamics. The comments were a mixture of supportive friends who clearly had no context, and a few family members asking gentle questions about what was happening. Daniel's responses were masterfully vague, painting himself as the mature adult making difficult but necessary decisions about an unspecified family situation. Nowhere in his posts was any mention of Christmas morning with Lily, Christmas dinner, or family celebration. For someone who usually documented every family milestone, the absence of Christmas content was telling. Either their nuclear family Christmas hadn't been as magical as anticipated, or Daniel was already beginning to understand that publicly celebrating his mother's exile might not play well with their community. But the real shift came on December 28th, when the first concrete consequence of my boundary setting made its appearance. I was having coffee with my book club friend Margaret when my phone rang. Daniel's name on the screen, calling at 10:30 a.m. on a Wednesday. I almost declined the call. I wasn't ready for another conversation about boundaries and overwhelming mothers, but something made me answer. "Mom, His voice sounded different, strained. "I need to ask you about something." "Of course. Did you did you cancel the automatic transfer for our mortgage payment?" There it was, the first domino falling exactly on schedule. "Yes, I did." Silence stretched across the phone line. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was careful, controlled. "Why would you do that without talking to me first?" "The same reason you excluded me from Christmas without talking to me first. Because apparently we're making unilateral decisions about our family relationships now." "Mom, that's completely different. This affects our house, our stability, and Christmas affected my relationship with my granddaughter and my place in this family. But you didn't seem concerned about those consequences when you let Bethany pack my bag." Another pause. I could practically hear him processing, trying to figure out how to approach this conversation without admitting that my financial support was essential to their lifestyle. "Look, I understand you're upset about Christmas. Maybe we handled that wrong. But you can't just cut off our mortgage payment because you're angry." "I'm not cutting off anything because I'm angry. I'm implementing the healthy boundaries that you and Bethany said were necessary. You wanted independence from my overwhelming involvement in your lives. This is what independence looks like." "But we depend on that payment, Mom. You know we can't afford the full mortgage on our own." The admission hung in the air like a confession. For 3 years, we'd all pretended that my contribution was temporary, assistance, help during a rough patch, a bridge until they got back on their feet. But here was Daniel, finally speaking the truth. They couldn't afford their lifestyle without me.
"I'm aware of your financial situation," I said calmly, "just like I was aware of it when I've been covering your mortgage for 36 months. But according to Bethany, my involvement in your lives has become problematic. So I'm removing that problem. This isn't about the money, and you know it." "Isn't it?" Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like it's about the money. "You were perfectly happy to accept my financial support while excluding me from family holidays. You wanted my contributions without my presence. That's not how family works, Daniel." His voice shifted, became pleading. "Mom, please, we can work this out. Maybe Bethany overreacted about Christmas. Maybe we can find a compromise." A compromise would have been having a conversation about Christmas boundaries before December 23rd. A compromise would have been acknowledging that the woman paying your mortgage might deserve a seat at your Christmas table. This isn't a compromise situation anymore. "So what are you saying? You're never going to help us again?" "I'm saying that help and being taken for granted are two different things, and I'm no longer available to be taken for granted." After I hung up, I sat in Margaret's kitchen, my hands slightly shaky from adrenaline. Margaret, who had heard enough of my side of the conversation to understand the situation, reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Scared," I admitted, and relieved, and guilty, and proud. I laughed shakily, basically every emotion at once. That sounds about right for standing up for yourself after years of being a doormat. That afternoon, I received a text from Bethany, the first direct communication I'd had from her since she'd handed me my overnight bag. "Dorothy, Daniel told me about the mortgage situation. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time. 3 days earlier, she'd told me I was too controlling and overwhelming to spend Christmas with my granddaughter. Now she wanted to talk because my financial support had disappeared. The timing wasn't coincidental. Instead of responding immediately, I drove to the bank and requested a meeting with my personal banker to discuss my account activity and ensure all the cancellations had been processed correctly. Janet, the woman who'd helped me cancel the automatic transfers, walked me through the confirmations with professional discretion. All automatic transfers to account ending in 7842 have been successfully canceled. The account holder will likely see a notification about failed payment attempts when their January bills are processed. And there's no way for them to reverse these changes without my authorization? Correct, since these were voluntary transfers from your account,
Only you can reinstate them. That evening, I finally responded to Bethany's text. I don't believe there's been any misunderstanding. You made your feelings about my involvement in your family very clear on December 23rd. I'm simply respecting those feelings by removing my involvement entirely. Her response came within minutes. Dorothy, you're being unreasonable. Family disagreements don't have to affect practical matters like bills and responsibilities. I read her message 3 times, each reading making me angrier. Even now, even when she needed my money, she couldn't bring herself to apologize for the Christmas eviction. She couldn't acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, they'd treated me poorly. Instead, she wanted to compartmentalize our relationship. Take my money, but keep my presence optional. You're absolutely right, I texted back. Family disagreements shouldn't affect practical matters. That's exactly why I won't let our disagreement affect my practical decision to stop funding a household where I'm not welcome. The phone rang almost immediately. Bethany, calling now instead of texting, her voice sharp with barely controlled panic when I answered. Dorothy, we need to resolve this. The mortgage payment is due January 1st. If it's late, we'll get hit with fees, and it affects our credit score. Then I suggest you make the payment on time. You know we can't afford it without your help. There it was again. The admission that their independence was fictional, that their nuclear family couldn't actually support itself without overwhelming Dorothy's financial contributions. Bethany, you told me I was too controlling and that my presence was ruining your family time. You said you needed space from me. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. But that doesn't mean you should stop helping with the house. Why not? If I'm too overwhelming to spend Christmas with my granddaughter, why aren't I too overwhelming to pay for the roof over her head? Silence. Finally, that's different. How is it different? More silence. Because there wasn't an answer that didn't expose the ugly truth. They wanted my money without my presence, my support without my company, my love without my person. Dorothy, please, we made a mistake. We can fix this. You certainly made a mistake, I agreed, but I'm not sure it's fixable. You see, Bethany, I've learned something important about boundaries this week. They work both ways. You set a boundary about not wanting me at Christmas. I'm setting a boundary about not funding people who don't want me in their lives. When I hung up the phone, my apartment felt different. Quieter, but not empty. Peaceful, but not resigned. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't worried about whether Daniel and Bethany had enough money in their checking account. I wasn't calculating their monthly expenses or planning for their next financial emergency. Instead, I was thinking about my own plans, my own future, my own boundaries.
Outside my window, the Christmas decorations on my street were starting to look tired, and I could see neighbors taking down their lights. The holidays were ending, but something new was beginning. Something that belonged entirely to me. The coordinated assault began on New Year's Day, which I should have seen as symbolic. They'd given me exactly 1 week to reconsider my position, 1 week to come to my senses and resume my role as their silent financial benefactor. When that didn't happen, they deployed what I can only describe as a guilt campaign with military precision. It started with Daniel's sister, Rebecca, calling from Portland at 7 a.m., her voice artificially sweet with concern. Dorothy, I hope you don't mind me calling so early, but Daniel reached out to me yesterday. He's really worried about you. I was making my morning coffee, still in my robe, trying to ease into the first day of what I hoped would be a better year. Worried about me? Why? Well, he mentioned that you've been struggling lately, making some unusual decisions about family finances. He thinks you might be going through something difficult and maybe not thinking clearly. The manipulation was so smooth, I almost missed it. Daniel hadn't told Rebecca that they'd kicked me out of Christmas. Instead, he'd painted me as an unstable older woman making irrational financial decisions, someone who needed intervention rather than someone who'd finally stood up for herself. Rebecca, did Daniel tell you what happened at Christmas? A pause. He mentioned there was some family tension. You know how stressful the holidays can be. Did he mention that Bethany told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas and handed me a packed bag on December 23rd? Longer pause. No, he didn't mention that specifically, but Dorothy, whatever happened, cutting off their mortgage payments seems like an extreme reaction. That's their home, their security. Their security that I've been paying for while being told I'm too overwhelming to spend Christmas with my granddaughter? But surely you don't want to see them lose their house over a family disagreement? There it was, the same argument Bethany had used, packaged in Rebecca's caring voice. The suggestion that my hurt feelings were petty compared to their mortgage payments, that family harmony required me to absorb their cruelty without consequences. Rebecca wasn't the last. Over the next 3 days, I received calls from Daniel's Uncle Frank in Chicago, cousin Jennifer in Atlanta, even Bethany's sister Amanda, who I'd met exactly twice at family gatherings. Each conversation followed the same script: concern for my well-being, gentle suggestions that I was overreacting, and increasingly desperate pleas for me to reconsider my extreme response. The most insulting call came from Bethany's mother, Patricia, a woman who'd barely acknowledged my existence during the 5 years since Daniel and Bethany's wedding. She called on January 3rd, her voice dripping with false intimacy. "Dorothy, dear, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. Bethany is just beside herself with worry about this situation." Is she worried about the situation or worried about the mortgage payment? Well, both, of course. You know how much that house means to them, how hard they've worked to build their life there. Patricia, how much do you know about how hard they've worked to afford that house? I know that they've been very responsible, very careful with their finances. I almost laughed. Patricia, I've been paying their mortgage for 3 years, along with property taxes, insurance, and school tuition. Their responsible financial management has been funded entirely by my retirement savings. Silence. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its sugary tone. "Dorothy, even so, family is family. Sometimes we have to set aside our pride for the good of the children." You're absolutely right. Family is family, which is why it's so disappointing that your daughter chose to exclude me from Christmas rather than finding a way to address whatever concerns she had about my involvement. But Bethany says you can be quite assertive about household decisions. Sometimes it's hard for young couples to establish their independence when parents are too involved. Too involved in paying their bills? Too involved in general. Bethany just wants to run her own household without interference. Then she should run her own household without my financial support. Patricia's facade cracked completely. "Dorothy, you're being vindictive. This isn't about you. It's about Lily's stability, her home, her school. Are you really going to punish a 7-year-old because your feelings were hurt?" Using Lily as emotional leverage was a tactical error. It revealed exactly how desperate they'd become and how little they understood my motivations. For 3 years, I'd endured their casual dismissal of my contributions because I loved Lily. I accepted being taken for granted because I wanted my granddaughter to have stability and opportunities. But now they were weaponizing that love, trying to guilt me into resuming my role as their ATM by suggesting that my boundaries were somehow harmful to Lily. It was manipulative, cruel, and completely ineffective. Patricia, Lily's stability has been built on my financial contributions for 3 years. If Bethany was concerned about Lily's well-being, she might have considered that before deciding I was too overwhelming to spend Christmas with her.
The calls intensified over the weekend. Saturday brought a voicemail from Daniel's childhood friend Marcus, who somehow felt qualified to mediate a family financial dispute. Sunday featured a call from their neighbor Janet, who'd apparently been recruited to share her observations about what a loving family Daniel and Bethany were trying to build. But the breaking point came Monday evening when my doorbell rang at 8 p.m. Through the peephole, I could see Daniel standing on my porch, holding what looked like a manila envelope.
I considered not answering, but curiosity won over caution. He looked terrible. Unshaven, tired, wearing a wrinkled shirt that suggested he'd come straight from work without going home first. "Mom, we need to talk." "I thought we'd already talked. Multiple times. Please, 5 minutes." I let him in, noting how he looked around my apartment as if seeing it for the first time. Maybe he was. In 3 years of me helping them, he'd rarely visited my place. Our relationship had been conducted at their house, on their terms, around their schedule. "Mom, this has gone too far." He sat on my couch, the envelope balanced on his knees. "I know you're hurt about Christmas, and maybe we handled that wrong, but you can't destroy our lives because you're angry." "I'm not destroying anything, Daniel. I'm simply no longer subsidizing your lifestyle." "It's not subsidizing. You're helping family. That's what family does." "Is it? Because when I needed family at Christmas, when I needed to feel valued and included, where was that family obligation?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his teenage years when he was frustrated about things not going his way. "Mom, Christmas was one day. One day that went badly because everyone was stressed and maybe said things they didn't mean. But this cutting off our mortgage, our security, this affects everything. Our credit, our home, Lily's school. One day? Daniel, do you think this started with Christmas? Do you think I woke up on December 23rd and randomly decided to feel unappreciated? I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to say you understand that paying someone's bills for 3 years while being told you're too overwhelming to spend holidays with them is not a sustainable relationship." He opened the manila envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. "I brought something to show you. These are all the thank you cards, the birthday cards, the Mother's Day cards we've given you over the past 3 years. Look at them, Mom. Look at how much we appreciate you." I stared at the collection of greeting cards, most of them generic Hallmark sentiment with brief handwritten notes. "Thank you for everything, Mom. Hope you have a wonderful Mother's Day. Grateful for all your love and support." Daniel, these are greeting cards. They show how much you mean to us. No, they show that you remembered to buy cards. Appreciation isn't sending a Mother's Day card and then excluding me from Christmas 8 months later. "But we do appreciate you. Maybe we don't say it enough. Maybe we take some things for granted, but we love you, Mom." Love isn't accepting someone's money while rejecting their presence. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the cards spread across my coffee table. When he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion. "What do you want us to do? How do we fix this?" It was the first time since Christmas that anyone had asked what I wanted rather than demanding what they needed. The question caught me off guard, partly because I wasn't sure I had an answer, and partly because I wasn't sure it mattered anymore. "I want you to understand that I'm not your emergency fund. I'm not your backup plan. I'm not your financial safety net that you can ignore until you need money. I'm your mother, and I deserve to be treated like family, not like a bank." "But you are family. You'll always be family." "Then treat me like family, all the time, not just when you need something." He gathered up the cards, his movements slow and defeated. "So what happens now? Do we lose the house? Does Lily have to change schools?" "I don't know, Daniel. Those are your decisions to make, your problems to solve. You wanted independence from my involvement in your lives. This is what independence looks like." After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the ghost of our conversation. For the first time since Christmas, I felt a flicker of doubt about my choices. Not regret. I still believed I was right to establish boundaries, but uncertainty about whether those boundaries needed to be so absolute. But then I remembered Christmas Eve in that hotel room, remembered the casual cruelty of being handed a packed bag, remembered 3 years of my contributions being taken for granted while my presence was treated as optional. Some lessons are too important to learn gently,
And some people don't appreciate what they have until they lose it completely. The breaking point came on January 8th, when I discovered that Daniel and Bethany had escalated their campaign beyond family pressure. I was having lunch with my friend Susan at Romano's Cafe when she leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a concerned whisper. "Dorothy, I have to ask you something, and please don't take this the wrong way, but Linda Morrison mentioned that she heard you've been having some difficulties lately? Something about making erratic financial decisions?"
Linda Morrison. Bethany's book club friend, a woman I'd met perhaps 3 times at community events. The fact that she was discussing my erratic financial decisions with people in my social circle meant Daniel and Bethany had moved beyond recruiting family members. They were now spreading their version of events throughout our small community. What exactly did Linda say? Susan looked uncomfortable, clearly regretting bringing it up. She mentioned that your son was worried about you, that you'd made some sudden decisions about stopping financial support to his family. She suggested that maybe you weren't thinking clearly lately. I set down my fork carefully, my appetite disappearing. Susan, did Linda mention why I stopped providing financial support? She said there was some kind of family disagreement, but that it seemed like an overreaction on your part. She was actually asking if any of us had noticed signs that you might be struggling mentally. The audacity was breathtaking. Not only were they refusing to acknowledge their own behavior, they were now painting me as mentally unstable to justify their panic about losing my financial support. They were publicly questioning my mental competence while privately begging me to resume paying their bills. Susan, I need to tell you what actually happened. I spent the next 30 minutes laying out the truth. The 3 years of financial support, the Christmas exclusion, the packed bag and hotel stay, Bethany's demands that I respect their boundaries while maintaining my financial contributions. Susan listened with growing outrage, her expression shifting from concern to anger. They kicked you out at Christmas after you've been paying their mortgage, and now they're telling people you're having mental health issues? Apparently so. Dorothy, you need to set the record straight. If they're going to spread lies about your mental state, you have every right to share the truth about their behavior. That afternoon, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I was going to tell my story completely and publicly, with documentation to back up every claim. I started with a detailed letter to my family members, not Daniel's manipulated version of events, but the full truth with financial records attached. I sent copies to Rebecca, Uncle Frank, Cousin Jennifer, and every relative who'd called to lecture me about family obligations. The letter included bank statements showing the mortgage payments, receipts for property taxes and insurance, documentation of school tuition payments, and a timeline of every major financial contribution I had made. I want you to understand exactly what family obligations have meant in my relationship with Daniel and Bethany. I've attached evidence of $203,847 in financial support over 3 years, provided without any request for gratitude or acknowledgement, simply out of love for my son and granddaughter. On December 23rd, I was told this support made me too controlling and overwhelming to spend Christmas with my family. I was handed a packed bag and told to stay at a hotel. The letter concluded, I'm not having mental health issues, as some of you may have been told. I'm having a clarity moment about what it means to be valued for my money, but not my presence. I hope you'll understand why I can no longer financially support people who consider me too burdensome to include in family holidays. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Rebecca called within 2 hours of receiving the letter, her voice shaking with anger. Dorothy, I am so sorry. If I had known what really happened, I never would have called to lecture you. What they did is inexcusable. Uncle Frank's response came via email. I owe you a huge apology. Daniel led me to believe you were being unreasonable about some minor family dispute. The financial documentation you provided tells a completely different story. No one should be expected to pay someone's mortgage while being excluded from their family. But the most satisfying response came from cousin Jennifer in Atlanta, who forwarded me a strongly worded message she had sent to Daniel. I'm appalled by how you and Bethany have treated your mother, and even more appalled that you tried to manipulate family members into pressuring her. Your mother has been extraordinarily generous, and your response has been cruel and ungrateful. Don't contact me again asking me to intercede in a situation where you are clearly in the wrong. Next, I addressed the community gossip campaign. I drafted a careful, factual post for the Willowbrook Community Facebook group, where Linda Morrison and other neighborhood busybodies regularly shared local news and opinions. I've recently learned that there's been some concern about my well-being circulating in our community. I want to address these rumors directly. I am not experiencing mental health issues. I recently made the decision to discontinue financial support to family members after being excluded from Christmas celebrations and told that my presence was too overwhelming for family gatherings. This was not an erratic decision, but a boundary-setting choice after 3 years of providing substantial financial assistance while being treated as an optional family member. I appreciate the concern of friends and neighbors, but want to assure everyone that I'm thinking clearly and making deliberate choices about how I spend my retirement savings. The post generated an immediate response. Neighbors who'd wondered about my absence from recent family gatherings began connecting the dots. Comments poured in offering support and sharing similar experiences with ungrateful family members. "Good for you for standing up for yourself," wrote Nancy Fleming, a woman I barely knew from the church auxiliary. "Family doesn't treat family that way. I've watched you be nothing but generous and kind to your son's family for years," added Tom Rodriguez, who lived 3 doors down from Daniel and Bethany. "If they can't appreciate what they have, that's their loss." But the most powerful validation came from an unexpected source. Martha Hendricks, Lily's teacher at Oakwood Academy, sent me a private message through Facebook. "Mrs. Hartwell, I hope it's appropriate for me to reach out. I've been Lily's teacher for 2 years, and I want you to know that she talks about her grandmother Dorothy constantly. She's always excited when you pick her up from school or attend her events. I don't know what's happening in your family, but I wanted you to know that Lily clearly adores you and considers you a central part of her life. Whatever adults have decided about family relationships, please know that you've been a positive, loving presence in that little girl's life." The message brought tears to my eyes. Not from sadness, but from gratitude that someone had witnessed and validated my relationship with Lily beyond the financial contributions that had somehow become the only thing Daniel and Bethany could see. The community response shifted the power dynamic completely. Instead of being the unstable woman making erratic financial decisions, I became the generous grandmother who'd been mistreated by ungrateful family members. The narrative Daniel and Bethany had tried to control was now completely out of their hands. On January 10th, I received a frantic call from Daniel. "Mom, you have to take down that Facebook post. People are commenting, asking questions. Bethany mortified." Mortified by what? By the truth? By having our private family business discussed publicly? "Daniel, you made it public business when you started telling people I was having mental health problems. I'm simply correcting the record with facts. But this makes us look terrible. That's because your behavior has been terrible. Actions have consequences, and one consequence of treating me poorly is that people might find out about it. People don't understand the full situation. They understand that I've been paying your bills for 3 years and you excluded me from Christmas. What else do they need to understand?" The silence on the other end was telling. For the first time since this began, Daniel had no response, no justification, no manipulation tactic. Just the recognition that their behavior, when exposed to daylight, looked exactly as cruel as it felt. "Mom, please, can't we find a way to work this out privately?" "We could have worked it out privately if you'd been willing to have honest conversations about how I was being treated. Instead, you chose to spread rumors about my mental state while your wife begged me to resume paying your mortgage. That's not private family business. That's a public character assassination that I have every right to defend against." 3 days later, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Daniel and Bethany had listed their house for sale. Tom Rodriguez mentioned it during our chance encounter at the grocery store. His tone sympathetic but matter-of-fact. Saw the for sale sign go up yesterday morning. Guess they're downsizing. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Satisfaction that consequences were finally materializing, sadness that it had come to this, and a surprising sense of peace that I was no longer responsible for solving their financial problems. That evening, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, looking through the stack of supportive messages I'd received from friends and neighbors. For 3 years, I'd been invisible, the woman quietly funding someone else's lifestyle while being treated as an afterthought. Now, for the first time, my community saw me as I really was, someone who'd given generously and been repaid with cruelty. The truth had a way of clarifying everything. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is let people face the full consequences of their choices, even when those consequences are exactly what they deserve. The final confrontation came 3 weeks after their house went on the market, though I didn't know it would be final at the time. I was leaving the Riverside Public Library on a cold Saturday afternoon in February when I spotted Bethany's silver Honda in the parking lot. She was sitting behind the steering wheel, engine running, clearly waiting for me. My first instinct was to avoid her entirely, walk to a different part of the parking lot, maybe go back inside the library until she left. But something about her posture, slumped over the steering wheel like someone who'd been crying, made me reconsider. Against my better judgment, I walked toward her car. She rolled down the window as I approached, and I could see that she had indeed been crying. Her mascara was smudged, her eyes red and puffy, her usually perfect blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. This wasn't the composed woman who had handed me a packed bag at Christmas. This was someone who looked genuinely broken. "Dorothy, please, can we talk?" "I think we've talked enough, Bethany." "Please, just 5 minutes. I drove all the way here because I didn't know where else to find you." The desperation in her voice was so raw that I found myself nodding. 5 minutes. She got out of the car, wrapping her coat tighter against the February wind. We stood between our parked cars like two people who barely knew each other, which, I realized, might have been more accurate than I had ever acknowledged.
"The house sold," she said without preamble. "I heard. We had to take $40,000 less than we wanted because we needed to close quickly. Daniel lost his job 2 weeks ago." This was news to me, and I felt a flicker of concern before reminding myself that Daniel's employment status was no longer my responsibility to worry about. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Henderson Engineering laid off half their staff. Daniel's been there 4 years, but he was still among the junior employees." She wiped her nose with a tissue that looked like it had been used many times already. "We have to be out of the house by March 15th? I waited, not sure what response she was looking for. "We found an apartment in Millfield, 2 bedrooms. Lily will have to change schools again, leave all her friends." Her voice cracked on the word friends. "It's not in a great neighborhood, but it's what we can afford now." Millfield was the next town over, known primarily for its aging apartment complexes and higher crime rates. It wasn't dangerous, but it was a significant step down from their colonial in Willowbrook. "Bethany, why are you telling me this?" She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Because I need you to know what your decision has cost us, what it's cost Lily." There it was, the last desperate attempt to use my granddaughter as emotional leverage. But this time, instead of making me feel guilty, it made me angry. "What my decision has cost you? Bethany, my decision was to stop paying for a lifestyle you couldn't afford after being told I was too overwhelming to spend Christmas with my granddaughter. Your financial situation is the result of your choices, not mine." "But we had to take $40,000 less than we wanted because we needed to close quickly. Daniel lost his job 2 weeks ago." This was news to me, and I felt a flicker of concern before reminding myself that Daniel's employment status was no longer my responsibility to worry about. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Henderson Engineering laid off half their staff.
Daniel's been there 4 years, but he was still among the junior employees. She wiped her nose with a tissue that looked like it had been used many times already. We have to be out of the house by March 15th? I waited, not sure what response she was looking for. We found an apartment in Millfield, 2 bedrooms. Lily will have to change schools again, leave all her friends. Her voice cracked on the word friends. It's not in a great neighborhood, but it's what we can afford now. Millfield was the next town over, known primarily for its aging apartment complexes and higher crime rates. It wasn't dangerous, but it was a significant step down from their colonial in Willowbrook. Bethany, why are you telling me this? She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Because I need you to know what your decision has cost us, what it's cost Lily. There it was, the last desperate attempt to use my granddaughter as emotional leverage. But this time, instead of making me feel guilty, it made me angry. What my decision has cost you? Bethany, my decision was to stop paying for a lifestyle you couldn't afford after being told I was too overwhelming to spend Christmas with my granddaughter. Your financial situation is the result of your choices, not mine. But we can't just start over from nothing. We have a child. You're not starting from nothing. You're starting from whatever you can actually afford. That's what most people do. She leaned against her car, looking defeated. What do you want from us? What would it take for you to help us again? The question hung in the cold air, and I realized she still didn't understand. Even now, even after everything, she thought this was a negotiation. She thought there was a price, some combination of apology and behavior modification that would restore her access to my bank account. Bethany, I don't want anything from you. I wanted to be treated like family instead of like a financial institution. I wanted my contributions to be acknowledged instead of taken for granted. I wanted to spend Christmas with my granddaughter instead of alone in a hotel. But that time has passed. So this is permanent? You're never going to help us again? I'm never going to be taken advantage of again. She stood up straighter, and I could see anger flashing in her tear-filled eyes. So you're willing to let your granddaughter suffer because your pride was hurt? I'm willing to let Lily's parents take responsibility for providing for her, just like every other parent in the world does.
I have the means to help people who treat me with respect and appreciation. You chose to exclude me from your family. I'm simply honoring that choice. For a moment, I thought she might say something else. Maybe the actual apology that had never come. Maybe some acknowledgement of how poorly they'd treated me. Instead, she got back in her car, rolled down the window one more time, and delivered what felt like a final blow. Lily asks about you every day. She doesn't understand why Grandma Dorothy doesn't come around anymore. How am I supposed to explain to a 7-year-old that her grandmother abandoned her family over hurt feelings? The words hit exactly where she'd aimed them, right in the center of my love for Lily. For a moment, I felt the familiar guilt rising, the urge to apologize and fix everything and resume my role as their financial savior. But then I thought about Lily growing up watching her parents take advantage of people who loved them. I thought about her learning that love meant accepting mistreatment, that family meant giving without receiving, that boundaries were something other people weren't allowed to have. Tell her the truth, Bethany. Tell her that Grandma Dorothy loves her very much, but that grown-ups sometimes make decisions that hurt other people. And sometimes those decisions have consequences that affect everyone. Tell her that families should treat each other with kindness and respect. And when they don't, relationships change. I walked toward my car, then turned back for one final thought. And Bethany, I didn't abandon Lily. You chose to exclude me from her life when you decided I was too overwhelming to spend Christmas with her. I'm just not paying for the privilege of being excluded anymore. As I drove away, I could see her in my rearview mirror, still sitting in her car in the library parking lot. I felt sad for her, sad for Daniel, even sad for their situation. But I didn't feel guilty anymore.
For the first time in 3 years, someone else was responsible for solving the problems they'd created, and that felt like freedom. 2 days later, I received a text from Daniel. "Mom, we're moving to Millfield next month. Maybe after we get settled, we can work on rebuilding our relationship." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I hope you build a good life there. When you're ready to rebuild our relationship based on mutual respect rather than financial need, call me." He never responded to that text, but I wasn't waiting by the phone anymore. Some bridges, once burned, leave healthier ground in their place. 6 months later, I was sitting in my garden on a warm August evening, deadheading the roses I'd finally had time to properly tend, when my phone buzzed with an unexpected notification. A friend request on Facebook from someone named Lily Marie Wilkins. My heart stopped for a moment before I realized what I was looking at. Lily had gotten her own Facebook account, probably with supervision given her age, and she was trying to connect with me. The profile picture showed my granddaughter grinning at the camera, missing 2 front teeth I hadn't known she'd lost, wearing a soccer uniform I'd never seen. I accepted the request immediately and found a message waiting for me. "Hi, Grandma Dorothy. Mom helped me make this account so I could talk to you. I miss you lots. Can you come see my new room sometime?" The simplicity of it, the pure, uncomplicated love in those words made my eyes well up. Here was Lily, reaching across the divide her parents had created, asking the question they'd never been able to ask. Can we just be family again? I spent 20 minutes crafting my response, trying to find words that were honest but age-appropriate. "Hi, sweetheart. I miss you too, so much. I would love to see your new room. Maybe your mom and dad and I can figure out a way to make that happen." Over the next few weeks, Lily and I exchanged messages through Facebook's Kids Safe messaging system. She told me about her new school in Millfield, how she'd made friends with a girl named Emma who lived in the same apartment complex, about the community center where she joined a soccer team. Her messages were full of the resilient optimism that children somehow maintain even when their world gets turned upside down. But it was also clear that the family was struggling. Lily mentioned that Daddy was still looking for work, that they had to eat budget dinners most nights, and that she missed her old bedroom with the window seat where we used to read together. Daniel had found part-time work at a hardware store in Millfield, but it was a significant step down from his engineering position. According to Lily's innocent updates, money was tight and the stress was showing. "Mom and Dad had a loud talk last night, but Mom said it wasn't about me." 3 weeks into our Facebook correspondence, I received an unexpected phone call. Not from Daniel or Bethany, but from my cousin Rebecca. "Dorothy, I hope this isn't overstepping, but I wanted to let you know that I've been in touch with Daniel recently." I tensed, wondering if this was another attempt at family mediation. "Oh." "He called me last week asking for advice about job hunting. He seemed different, humbled, I guess. He actually apologized for how he handled things with you, for trying to manipulate family members to pressure you." This was unexpected. "What did you tell him?"
I told him the truth, that what he and Bethany did was inexcusable, but that everyone deserves a chance to make things right if they're genuinely willing to do the work. And what did he say to that? He asked if I thought you'd ever be willing to talk to him again. Not about money, she added quickly. He was very clear that he wasn't asking for financial help. He said he wanted to apologize properly and maybe find a way for Lily to have her grandmother back in her life. I was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. What do you think, Rebecca? Do you think he's genuine? I think losing everything has given him some perspective he didn't have before. Pride is expensive, and sometimes people don't realize how much they're paying until the bill comes due. That evening, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Daniel directly. He answered on the second ring, his voice cautious. "Mom?" "Hello, Daniel. Rebecca mentioned that you've been thinking about things." "Yes." His voice was quiet, different from the defensive tone I'd grown used to over the past months. "Mom, I owe you an apology. A real one, not the non-apology I gave you before." "I'm listening." "What we did at Christmas was cruel. What Bethany did, what I allowed her to do, was inexcusable.
You had been nothing but generous to us for years, and we repaid that generosity by treating you like you were disposable." His voice cracked slightly. "I was so focused on supporting Bethany, on keeping peace in my marriage, that I forgot my obligation to the woman who raised me and loved me unconditionally." I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness yet, but the possibility of it. "We took advantage of your love for Lily, and we took advantage of your financial support, and then we had the audacity to act like victims when you finally said enough. I understand now why you did what you did, and I don't blame you for it." "What changed, Daniel?" "Everything changed. Losing the house, losing my job, watching Lily have to start over in a new place. It all forced me to face some truths I'd been avoiding. The main one being that you weren't the problem in our family dynamic. We were." I waited for him to continue. "Bethany's been going to counseling, individual counseling, to work on some of her control issues and anxiety about family relationships. She's starting to understand that pushing you away wasn't about boundaries. It was about fear of not being the most important person in my life." "And you? Are you in counseling too?" "We both are, together and separately. It's been eye-opening. I realized I never learned how to balance being a husband and being a son. Instead of figuring out how to honor both relationships, I just chose the one that seemed easier in the moment." There was a long pause before he continued. "Mom, I'm not calling to ask for anything. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking you to fix our problems. I'm calling to tell you that I love you, that I'm sorry, and that Lily misses her grandmother terribly. I miss her too. Would you be willing to meet somewhere? Maybe just for coffee. I know we have a lot of rebuilding to do, and I know it might take time, but Lily keeps asking when she can see you again, and I realize that the only thing standing in the way of that is my own pride." 2 days later, I met Daniel at a quiet cafe in the town between Riverside and Millfield. He looked older, more worn than he had in February, but there was something clearer in his eyes. The desperate edge was gone, replaced with something that looked like genuine humility. "You look good, Mom," he said as we sat down with our coffee. "You look tired." He laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from him in months. "I am tired, but it's a different kind of tired than before. It's the tired that comes from actually dealing with your problems instead of expecting someone else to solve them." We talked for 2 hours, really talked, maybe for the first time in years. Daniel told me about the reality of their new life, the financial stress, but also the unexpected benefits of living within their means. How he and Bethany were learning to work as a team instead of assuming someone else would catch them when they fell. "Lily is thriving in ways we didn't expect," he admitted. "The soccer team, the friends at the community center. She's more independent, more resilient. Maybe because she had to be, but also because we're more present with her now that we're not always stressed about money we didn't actually have." When I asked about Bethany, Daniel was honest about the work she was doing to understand her behavior. "She's not ready to face you yet. She knows she owes you an apology, but she's still working through her own issues about control and family dynamics. She asked me to tell you that she's grateful for everything you did for us, and she's sorry it took losing it all for her to realize how badly she treated you." It wasn't a direct apology, but it was acknowledgement, more than I'd ever received from her before.
What do you want from me, Daniel? Not financially, but relationally. I want Lily to know her grandmother. I want to rebuild a relationship with my mother that's based on mutual respect instead of financial dependency. And I want to prove to you that we learned something from this whole nightmare. How do you propose we do that? Slowly. Maybe you could come to dinner sometime. At our apartment, our modest but adequate apartment that we pay for ourselves. Maybe you could come to one of Lily's soccer games. Maybe we could start having regular phone calls that aren't about money or problems, just about life. 3 weeks later, I drove to Millfield for Lily's soccer game. The community center field wasn't much to look at: patchy grass, rusty bleachers, a concession stand run by volunteers. But when Lily spotted me in the stands, her face lit up like Christmas morning. After the game, which her team won 3-2, she ran straight to me and wrapped her arms around my waist. "Grandma Dorothy, you came!" "I wouldn't miss it, sweetheart." That afternoon, I had dinner in Daniel and Bethany's small apartment. It was cramped, simply furnished, nothing like the spacious colonial I'd helped them afford. But there was something lighter about the atmosphere, less strained. Bethany was quiet but polite, and while we didn't address our past conflicts directly, she thanked me genuinely for coming. Over the following months, we slowly rebuilt something that looked like family. Not the same as before. The financial dependence was gone, and with it some of the resentment and entitlement that had poisoned our relationships. But something healthier, more honest. Daniel found full-time work at a small engineering firm in Millfield. The pay was less than he'd made at Henderson, but it was steady, and he was grateful for it in a way he'd never been grateful for anything before. Bethany picked up additional hours at a dental office closer to their new home. I helped occasionally, not with bills or mortgage payments, but with the kinds of help that grandmothers are supposed to provide. I babysat Lily when her parents had date nights. I took her shopping for school clothes and helped her with science projects. I came to soccer games and school concerts and birthday parties. But I never again paid for their lifestyle, and they never again asked me to. 1 year after our Christmas catastrophe, I spent Christmas Eve at Daniel and Bethany's apartment. It was crowded, loud, chaotic, with Lily's excitement and the neighbors' music bleeding through thin walls. The tree was smaller than the one in their old house, the presents fewer, the dinner simpler. It was the best Christmas I'd had in years. As I tucked Lily into her bed that night, she looked up at me with Daniel's eyes and my own stubborn chin. "Grandma Dorothy, I'm glad you're back." "I'm glad to be back, sweetheart." "Are you going to stay this time?" "As long as you want me here, and as long as everyone treats each other with kindness." "What does that mean?" "It means families love each other, not because they have to, but because they choose to. And choice means everyone gets to decide they want to be part of the family every single day." She nodded solemnly, then smiled. "I choose you, Grandma Dorothy. I choose you too, Lily Marie." Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to discover what they're truly capable of when the safety net disappears. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the knowledge that you're worth more than what you can provide for other people. Family isn't about obligation or financial support or fixing other people's problems. Family is about choosing each other, respecting each other, and showing up for each other when it matters. And sometimes you have to lose family to find it again.